Hello, everyone. So I've decided to go live today. This is Northwest PA for Progress, episode 2. I'm gonna try and do these videos once a week. It's either gonna be on Saturday or Sunday. Hopefully, I can nail down a specific day. My schedule's a little bit, let's just say, full. But as of right now, I'd like to take the time to talk with all you guys about a little bit more about my backstory. I've been changing my background a lot, so let me know what you guys think down below so I can, finally keep it set where I want it. So the most important thing for me is to make it so I am available to the public. So we already got one person watching. Hi. Local politicians make it very hard to get in contact with them, and that's the number one complaint I hear, is that they are out of touch. I tried to get a hold of them for this reason and that, and so that's why I chose to do this live stream. One, it gives you the ability to learn more about me and in small increments. But number two, it also gives me a chance to interact with you. So when we're live streaming, I want you guys to send comments and questions. Typically, I'm going to have a portion of an episode that I do that with. In one of the discussions I've had before, I have a few categories of things that people brought to my attention. I wrote them down because I'm all fancy like that. But to start, I want to give you a little bit more backstory on me. I grew up in northwestern Pennsylvania, and I say northwestern Pennsylvania because I have lived, in so many places, whether it be lived or worked or have had a vested interest in places all around northwestern Pennsylvania. To start, I was born in Corey, Pennsylvania. I was born in Erie. I grew up and lived in Corey, Pennsylvania. I started out living in the city of Corey in a smaller-ish apartment type style building. And from there, I went to Corey High School and Concord Elementary School. Concord doesn't exist anymore, which is sad because I really, really love that show, that school. But obviously we've seen throughout time that so many, hang on, I'm gonna bring the comments up here so I don't have to squint to look because I don't have my eyes on right now, so I'm gonna bring it up on my phone. Okay, here we go. That way if you guys send any comments, I will see them. So I grew up in Corey. As a kid, I didn't look like this. I grew up with my dad working multiple jobs. He worked as someone who plowed parking lots in the winter. He owned his own garage, that's where I learned how to work on cars. And he worked on our family farm, which I enjoyed helping him at. We had 150 cows, and I mean, I got to name quite a few of them. Not to toot my own horn, but they were like our pets when we were kids. We didn't have your typical, dog or cat. I had cows. We would go up and we'd feed them, and it was fun. Then, as I got older, I went to Corey High School. At Corey High School, I learned a lot living in going to a public school system. And I think that's something that at the state level, our politicians that are around us take for granted. Because a lot have been, have gone through private schools or what have you, but they forget what it's like to be in high school, in a public school, being around the people that you're going to interact with for the most part in your daily life. So I played soccer. I was on the track team for a year. That was interesting. But for the most part, I was just a normal kid. I was trying to get by. And for anyone who's gone through public school, I'm sure they can appreciate it wasn't always the easiest thing to do. You try and fit in, you try and move along, but it's not always that easy. And I guess that's where my passion for trying to fix the public school system comes from. Is that I've lived it. I see where the flaws are and the things that can be changed to make it easier for kids. I mean, I'm closer to high school age than most of on statistically on average than most of the politicians in Pennsylvania. So I understand where they're coming from, but I'm also at that age where, my friends are having kids. People I went to school with, I see that they're posting kids, and they're of that age where they're actually going into the public school systems, and they're coming to me with these problems because they don't know how to change them. And that's one of the things that really got me into wanting to fix education, is that I know some of the issues that they're having, but it's a major part of my life. And so that's why I'm trying in the next school year to go around to as many schools in the district as possible, because from my lived experience, I know that I personally, I'm not a teacher, I'm not an administrator, but the people who know the schools best aren't your school board, aren't your board of education, aren't your, politicians that are making the laws that are surrounding them. It's your principals, your teachers, your IT people that work in the schools, and your, janitors, your facility maintenance people, your lunch ladies or lunch people. Those are the people who know what happens in schools. And my biggest thing is I want to be able to talk with them. I want to be able to see what they think needs changed. Because, I would love to hear what parents have to say, but for 8 hours a day, your kids are in a school with people who literally work there. They spend most of half of their time in this area with your kids. So I want to hear what they have to say, but I also want to hear what everyone else has to say. I want to see what's going wrong with the school systems. Like, I've heard different things like infrastructure and making sure we get funding back into schools. And that's great, but is that truly going to help what the teachers need? I'm sure some of it is, but there are some things that I hear from people about schools that haven't been in schools in 10, 15, 20 years. Hell, some of the school board members haven't set foot in a school except for their meetings. They've never interacted with teachers or kids unless they come to their meetings. And that's something that I want to change. I want to flip that script and go into these schools and talk with them and see what they need to best educate our kids. So going back to my, me being a teenager, I enlisted in the military with my parents' consent at the age of 17. I went through and did my training and did my time there. And then I came back to Pennsylvania, where I was in the Pennsylvania Army National Guard for 8 years, right out of Cambridge Springs. We went to Harrisburg, we went to Philadelphia, we went to Virginia, California, all over the place. And over that 8-year time, I learned more about what happens in this country than I think I ever could in a classroom. but also it gave me the opportunity to go to college, which I went to Edinburgh University of Pennsylvania. I got a bachelor's degree in political science with a concentration in pre-law. And that's where my love of politics really came from. I started out as a criminal justice student, and as a criminal justice student, I kind of got into the, coming out, I thought about being a cop. Like, why not? I'm in the military, it kind of translates over, job skills, woo. But when I actually got there after my first year, I had some students and some professors that kind of really guided me towards politics. I was very passionate about it. At first I was after 2 years of being out of school, coming back into it, I was the one who wasn't like everyone else. So I just kind of sat quietly in the classrooms. But when I did speak, it was because I was making an impactful point on something. I remember one of the classes I was in, there was somebody going off on a random tangent in a political class that was in, and I actually cut them off because of what they were saying. And I said, we're in an intellectual place, or we're in a place of intellectual higher learning. If you're going to come in and spout about anything, you better have your facts straight. You're not just sitting out at a bar somewhere. We're all here to learn, and I'm not going to allow the words of someone who doesn't know what they're talking about to interrupt my learning. I'm here paying for this. This is what I'm trying to do. And that's when I met the professor that was teaching the political science class. It was Dr. Rhonda Matthews. And I mean, she follows this. She's a very close personal friend of mine and one of my mentors to this day. She's one of the people who helped me get on this path for Czech for Senate. Yay. But she saw something in me. She saw something in me that I don't think maybe a handful of people have seen, and that's someone who genuinely cares. I didn't realize how much our local elected officials influence the things around us without ever realizing it. And it took me, going and getting this education from these people who could show me, like, where to find it. My education wasn't about necessarily a specific area. It was about where to find the information I need. It opened my eyes to research, to look up, to verify, to do all of these things, and that led me into the realm of Pennsylvania politics. I took Pennsylvania criminology, or actually, I think I still have the book sitting on my shelf over there. PA Crimes Code, that's what it was. And I was just fascinated with how they wrote the laws, and that's kind of what got me into the legal studies program. This was before it turned into a minor, so I ended up getting a concentration in that field. But I was so fascinated by everything that was happening in it. It was honestly just, it came to me. Like, I worked well with it. It was like I was reading it another language, and I was learning how to read it. I was learning how to understand it. I was learning the difference between might and will, and how that affects politics and the legislature. It was just something that I really took a shining to. And so in that, I started studying Pennsylvania politics, not just the people in office, but also the laws that were being created. And I've come to find that a lot of the things that were being created actually affected us in the day-to-day. And some of the things actually affected me personally due to what some people may seem as insignificant. I remember one law that got passed for farmers. And the farmers, it made it so things had, certain things had to be up to code, but their code that they defined was very broad and open for interpretation for an inspection agency to make significant changes in the day-to-day life of farmers. Now, if you work on a farm, a multi-million-dollar farm, like, I don't know, Meadowbrook or something like that, they come in and say, hey, you need to fix this. It can be fixed. But when you work on a farm that has 150 cows but sustains a family of 4, and they say, hey, you need to get this $80,000 piece of equipment to be up to code, that affects the lives of 4, 6, 8 people that don't have $80,000 to fix whatever they're trying to fix. And there were other laws that got passed that seemed to be for the good of the people, but I didn't realize how much it was actually affecting. Like something that simple that happened down in Harrisburg, created by people who've never worked on a farm, who've never worked in the manufacturing industry, that have never been in retail or in hospitality, how all of these different laws and legislations that are passed day in and day out, year after year, can have negative consequences. It just because somebody doesn't know how it would affect them because they don't care. You know, they get an inkling or an idea from someone to make things better, but they don't actually look at how it is going to affect those people. They never check back in on it and see, hey, how are you affected by this new code or new policy or new procedure? They write it and then they move on because they aren't greatly affected by it. So ultimately, it really can have a devastating effect, and they'll never see it. You know, and coming from all of these people in the community that say, hey, I've tried to get a hold of my state legislature, I've tried to get a hold of my senator, I've tried to get a hold of my congressman, and nothing. And to them, it might just be another problem in a sea. Wow, my hair is really messed up. It might be just a problem in a sea of people, but that's why you were elected in the first place, is to help people. And I think somewhere along the lines is they get caught up in the election and being a politician, and they forget what it's like to be an elected official. And I think that's why there's such a negative connotation with the word politician. Because, and I was just talking with someone about this at the Democratic picnic yesterday, and they told me, you don't want to be a politician. Nobody likes politicians. You want to be an elected official. It's because in reality, I work 40 hours a week, sometimes more. But then I made the joke that I moonlight as a politician, and he told me, he's like, you don't want to say that because nobody likes politicians. You want to say you moonlight as an elected official. It sounds better, and that's what you're trying to do, is you're trying to get elected. And you know, that was me talking with 100 people, maybe. I can't quite remember how many were there, but there were a lot. I was just going around and talking to people, because that's kind of why I'm doing this, is I see a need for something. So after college, obviously I took some time for myself. It actually took me until I was in college to figure out who I was, because these things aren't talked about in the education system. You know, the one thing I didn't learn in my public school was what happens if you're different. I mean, maybe that's why I'm so drawn to making sure that protections are there for people who are different. It's because I see so many people out there that that are talking and making claims about, well, we talked last week about the Pencrest School District. And I think the one thing that Pencrest and some of these politicians, and I will use the word politicians for them because they stop being elected officials the second they stop caring about people. What these politicians forget, or maybe never knew, is what it was like to be different. And I remember watching a video, and I think I posted it down below on my page, that was of Representative Brian Sims. He was talking about the House Party and how they were talking about abortion legislation and how his female colleagues went up and just said these very deep and personal stories to stop what was trying to happen at the state legislature. And he said, and he was talking about the Republican Party, but it's not far off from most parties. There are very few people who are different, at least within PA and maybe even the United States. And that's why there are so many people who get notoriety for being different and running. But he said that your party is 100% white and 70% male. And that goes for a lot of the legislation that's being passed. And that's why I'm doing what I'm doing, is because, sure, it might just be to be a voice of reason. Like, hey, there are people who are different than you out there. There are people who deal with things differently just because they are different. That's okay. But to make their lives harder because you think that's what's popular, what's fun, is just wrong. To take something and make it the new boogeyman, as I've been saying, is, first it was communism, and that was, we were in a Cold War, sure. But then when you're talking about the people that live in your country, African American people, the LGBTQI, and you're talking about banning things just because it's the new boogeyman. But you know nothing about it. Jeff Brooks made a point when at the last school board meeting when they were talking about getting rid of critical race theory. He asked them if they knew what it meant. And they kept saying, they're trying to push that question off, but he insisted. He said, do you know what it means? Can you define it for me? And not a single person could. And that was kind of part of the issue, is that they pulled a Wikipedia definition as to define it. I don't know about you, but I learned this in my public high school. You're not allowed to use Wikipedia because it's publicly edited. If a public high school doesn't allow a citation from Wikipedia, I don't think we should allow our public school board to do so. But that's neither here nor there. My life has been full of people who have been trying to tell me what's best for me. It's been full of society. It's been full of people who have influence over my life, whether it be societal influence, professional influence, peer influence. They keep trying to tell me what's best for me, but they never had to live my life. And as a government official, that's what I bring to the table. I'm trying to be elected to bring that voice to the table. I'm a working class citizen. I have been. I grew up on a farm. I stepped down from being my current position as a manager to an automotive technician. One, because it's something that I'm good at. And two, because it helps me focus on what's really important, trying to make sure that everyone has good education, easily accessible, affordable healthcare, and helping fix the economy. But more so that, I hear time and time again that politicians talk about, oh, well, millennials don't do anything. Millennials don't do this. They ruin things. Well, it's time for a millennial to sit at the table, because it's easy to argue and say that we don't do anything and we aren't, active when they're not sitting at the table. My biggest thing is I'm trying to change the conversation. Even if it is just at a state level. Because for too long, the conversation has been what Brian Sims says, pretty one-sided. We have legislatures who are pushing trans sports bans and trying to push pharmaceuticals on a population that doesn't know about medical technologies. They're using their influence to essentially change the lives of the people around them without ever having to know how it affects them. I don't know about you, but have you ever tried to reach out to your local politician, whether it be state rep, senator? Some are better than most. But the most common thing is, unless you are somebody, they don't need to give you the time of day. That's where I differ. Because I'm just like everyone else. And I want to see real change. I remember one thing right before I was going to even run. I'd seen this woman on talking to the Virginia State Legislature. And I could probably link the video below, but she was talking about how politicians spend $40,000 a year on their furniture budget. And yet expect a family of 4, 5, 6 to not be in poverty with $25,000. Because that's the reality. Is that people every day are making difficult choices. They're making difficult choices that I've had to deal with. I've had to make difficult choices. But what they aren't doing is politicians aren't living with a minimum wage of $7.25. Because if they were, they would be changing that. If they had to fight for access to healthcare, or if they were downtrodden because of a pandemic that caused them to lose their job and therefore their healthcare, there wouldn't be a question as to a universal healthcare that the rest of the world has put as a basic human right and not a for-profit industry. That wouldn't be a question. If they ever once had to fight just to have access to medical care, universal healthcare would be a real thing. Or you have politicians who are talking about the small businesses while taking money from large corporations. Oh, I care about small businesses. And yet they create legislation that hurts small businesses because they've never worked at a small business. But the one thing that we can do as a group of people is put somebody there who has made a living on $7.25 an hour. Sure, maybe 10, 20 years ago, it might have been possible. Or put somebody there who lost their health care because a job made it so I didn't quite work enough hours or didn't have an open availability for the right part of the day. So I didn't get health care because it was contingent on my job and how much I worked instead of the value of a human life. Or you can elect an official who understands what it's like to go into a public school and be different. Because at one point in time in this country, our differences were something we could be proud of. Our differences made us what made America so great. At one point in time, we had open borders to make sure, and there was actually a line in coming into this country that said you were fleeing a dangerous situation. And that was an acceptable reason to come to this country to become a citizen. Now, it's not. It's time to elect somebody who will fight for the people and actually think about the legislation that they're writing and talk to the people that it affects most before pushing to get it written. And while, I hear quote-unquote progressive candidates every day talk about this, I don't know them. Not personally, anyway. But I know me. And I think that's one of the biggest draws I have, is that I am a normal Pennsylvanian, a normal citizen. I worked to get where I am today. And I'm still working at it. And I will keep working at it until I'm elected, because I feel like the people of Pennsylvania deserve somebody who's going to be at that table that can ask the hard questions, that isn't afraid to say, this is wrong, and this is why. To give life experience. Because there are many people that claim that their experience is what makes them the best politician. But they've been in government for how long? And what have they done with that experience? Some can say they've done a lot, but it's not necessarily good experience. And I don't know about you or anyone who might be watching this, but give me 1 second. I don't know about you, but I would want somebody who has that experience. Real life experience. I guess this would be the time to take questions, but there aren't many people watching, so not live anyway. I do have my list of things people wanted me to talk about, so I'm going to move on to those. And if you have any questions about my personal life story, feel free to reach out. So I wrote them on the cards nameless, just because I didn't really have time to ask anyone if they wanted their name to be shared. So I kind of mixed them up. And one of the things people wanted me to talk about is statewide sustainable programs. So statewide sustainable programs. I'm looking at, well, that's where it falls into my economy. Like there are different things that we create that are going to be a statewide initiative, like the idea for solar powered roadways. It's something that creates long lasting infrastructure, but also it provides power and internet and all these accessible things, which I've touched on in other videos, so I'm not going to go too much into that. But so as far as social programs go, I want to make it easier for nonprofits and companies that are pushing social programs to get access to funds to make it possible to do that. And I think that's something we don't talk about a lot of, is that, well, a lot of these people and places have great ideas. I've spoken to many people who have great ideas, whether it be, drug counseling relief or homes for homeless LGBTQ youth. The one thing that they always seem to find as an issue is funding. So I would like to be one of the first to write a legislation into the budget to advance social welfare. I realize that money's got to come from somewhere, and I want to work with the team that pushes or creates the budget to see where we can find it, so we're not taxing taxpayers anymore. Because there are things that are being funded that might not be as important as some of these social welfare programs. Improving our school districts. Well, I think it's something that I'm really looking for as a total education reform. I've spoken about getting rid of state mandated testing. I don't believe that the funding of a school district should be contingent on the funding you receive. Because the second you try and push the funding towards how well you do in state school or the state tests, that's all they're learning, is how to take a standardized test. There are teachers that have plans to teach kids about history, art, science, music, that can't, because they're so focused on standardized tests half the year that they never get around to it. And the only people that's hurting is the students. But not only that, is if we cut funding based on who does bad on these tests, how are they going to get better? Better infrastructure programs. I would like to touch on that specifically with the schools. I want to see that the infrastructure of our public schools is included in the budget for from the Department of Education. There are way too many schools across Pennsylvania that are deteriorating and falling apart, and they can't be maintained because these are massive projects, and they're saying that your local taxes will cover that. Well, guess what? When you have a $2 million project to update, I don't know, the lighting in a school, I don't think that should fall on our taxpayers when it's our state government that dictates the terms of the education system and our students being there. If you can't make them safe, if we can't make them safe, we should have to pay to fix them. So including that in with the education reform is something that I believe should happen, and something I want to work towards when I make it to the Senate. All right, moving on to the next person. Each card is one person. They just made things that they wanted me to talk about. So, women's rights and trans rights in regard to reproduction. Well, I have one thing about reproduction, and because obviously this is tied in with abortion, and that what this is, and when we talk about women's rights and reproductive rights, I am willing to have that conversation. But when we're talking about abortion, I don't want to hear anyone say they are pro-life when they are not taking sustainable measures to make sure that these children are not being born. That means giving access to birth control, giving the rights back to the women about whether they have a hysterectomy or not. I've heard horror stories about women going in to try and get a hysterectomy, and their doctor says the insurance makes them find out they have to either have already 2 kids, which there are some people who don't want to have kids, or they have to be a certain age. Yeah, you have to be a certain age to get a hysterectomy approved by your insurance. Or they have to have written consent from their husband. I shit you not, these are still things that exist today. Yeah. Or giving access to, I don't know, birth control. Teaching about contraceptives and safe sex as a regular thing instead of saying, oh, kids shouldn't learn about this. Yeah, I don't think kids should learn about sex, but if they're going to be of age to have it, they probably should know how to protect themselves from it and have a comprehensive education as to make sure that they're doing it safely. Because if you want to talk about being pro-life and pro-abortion, but not making sure that people are allowed to have safe sex and have the rights to their own bodies, you're not talking about abortions anymore. You're talking about controlling women's bodies, because that's literally all you want to do with this legislation. So when that's where I stand on that, abortion isn't anything about abortion, because if it were, we'd be trying to push social programs to make sure that the pregnancies never happened in the first place, but we're not doing that, are we? LGBT plus education. I mean, obviously this one touches home for me. There are way too many people who say they don't care about it. And by saying you don't care about it, is saying that you don't care about the kids in your district, because whether you like it or not, they're there. We're all there. And like I said, at one point in time, we were proud of our differences, and we were proud that these people existed. However, that's not the case anymore. And now the bullying and the harassment has been getting worse. And we as a state legislature shouldn't be doing things to make it easier for people to harass and pick on them. We should be making it safer for them to be in these schools and learning about seeing themselves in the learning that reflects them. We look at a heteronormative relationship, whether it be on TV, on the news, or whatever, and as long as it's straight, it's fine. It's not, they're too young, it's not this, that, or something else. But whether people like to believe it or not, they're in your schools. We are in your schools. We are teachers. You know, everyone in the schools that I talked about earlier, whether you know it or not, that's none of your goddamn business. But they're there, and I think it's only right that they be reflected in some of the teaching that they have. Hell, the only way we're going to change the conversation to where it doesn't matter who you are or who you go to bed with is by showing that it's okay to do that and not allowing political meandering in the public school systems to say that it's not okay, that you're not allowed to teach about it, to normalize it. And there goes the warning alarm, the loudest thing in the world. Surprised, I've done a few live recordings here, and this is the first time it's actually happened during one. Healthcare. This is the next person. Healthcare is obviously something that I want to see changed. I want to see, we are the #1 country in the world, we are one of the biggest first world countries in the world, and we're the only one who doesn't provide universal healthcare as a basic human right. we keep it contingent on whether or not you are a productive member of society. And people are actually choosing death because the costs are cheaper. I don't think that's right. And if, like I said earlier, if any single politician had to deal without having health care, they would be pushing to make sure it got changed. So, higher education. Okay, so higher education. This is something of a topic for me. I believe that education as a whole should not be something that we charge the individual who's seeking it. I've always learned that through education, we can be a well-rounded society. We can, I love to see when kids are excited about learning. But the second you start putting price tags on it and telling them that they can't get it because there's a price tag on it, that's when we start getting away from the excitement and look at it as a chore. If you have to save up, if you have to spend money on it, it's a part of your job. It's something that you have to do because it's literally affecting the rest of your life. And I don't believe education should be that way. And that includes higher education. I feel like if there are people willing to teach, we should provide and incentivize people to do that, because that's how we as individuals become better people, is through education. I see people, or I've taught people how to work on cars, and they thank me for it. I didn't ask them for money to do it, to teach them how to do it. Those are simple life skills. But the second you get into somebody wanting to learn from a professional about, how to do research, how to do computer stuff, how to do whatever, it's called higher education, and it costs an arm and a leg. And I don't think that's right. I think that anyone seeking knowledge should have access to it. And if we want it to be a well-rounded education as a form to get a degree, a piece of paper, which I just took mine down off the wall, which would have been great. Because essentially that's what I paid all the money I paid to go to college for, was a piece of paper that said that I am proficient in all of this. But yet I had to take classes that I didn't want to take just to get that piece of paper, because the state viewed my education as something that they could regulate. They say, oh, you have to have this, you have to have that, and there's a fly in here, and I don't know where it came from. But you have to have this, you have to have that to get this one degree. Okay, if you want to limit how or what I have to take to get my degree, then you should be chipping in to get the degree that you're making me work so hard to get. Green initiatives to combat climate change. So green initiatives for climate change. I mean, I've talked about my solar-powered roadways. I've talked about, doing with solar and wind and green energy. There are so many different possibilities that we could be doing, but we're not. And I don't understand it. Like, I've done the research myself, and I've seen that there are so many people out there that are... Oh, hey. Sorry, I just realized somebody else came on. But there are so many people out there that have shown how to make education or green initiatives profitable. And it will save millions upon millions of people money. I feel like this is a no-brainer, but we're not doing it. We're just not. And that's something I want to change when I get to the Senate. Solar-powered roadways is one of them. That's the big one. It'll provide infrastructure. It'll provide internet to people who have never had it before. For God's sakes, it'll look like Tron out there. Like, come on. You can change the patterns on the roads. It'll be safer for people. Like, if there's a deer in the road, like around a bend, if there's enough pressure on it, you can code these things to register that there's something in the road ahead and to slow down. They'll hold temperature at 41 degrees Fahrenheit at any given point in time at the lowest. Like, so in the winters, no more snow on the roads, no more ice buildup, no more accidents, no more salt corroding our cars that we have to pay taxes to get inspected by the state. Like, I feel like this is something that we should be at least looking into, but no, we're talking about the boogeyman because that's what Pennsylvania is. Okay, so the next one, the opioid crisis, and I am looking like I'm getting close on time, so probably another 5 minutes, but the opioid crisis, that's a part of the healthcare programs. I mean, Big Pharma pushed opioids on millions of Americans as a means to combat minor illnesses. And it caused people to be addicted to a drug that would kill. Like, we talk about weed like it's some bad thing, but we're not talking about doctors handing out prescriptions to Vicodins like it's candy. And why not? Because that's what Big Pharma wants. That's what that's what the pharmacies are saying will help people, but in actuality it just leads to a lifelong addiction that gets people killed. So I think if we're looking at this, and this isn't like new information, this is something that's been known for decades, but because the pharmaceutical companies are the ones that are in the pockets of all our politicians, of course we're going to be pushing pharmaceuticals like Vicodin and stuff like that. So when people get addicted, they move on to heroin, they move on to methamphetamines, they move on to what else? But weed's the gateway drug, right? Not the pills that are being pushed down our throats. Which also goes into this person's next point, which is criminal justice reform. One, the way people our laws around how people go to jail and whatnot, I think some of them are ridiculous and they need to be reviewed. Obviously, we're looking back into the whole, a lot of these laws, look at our public school code. It was created in 1948. We're not in 1948 anymore. So while we do minor tweaks here and there, I think it's something that just needs an overhaul. We need to, as tedious as it is, it's our job to make sure that these laws aren't there anymore. Wipe the slate clean. One, that would maybe even move it into a historical law. This used to be law. This is no longer law. So bye-bye. You would take the law books that you have to read that are this big and make them this big, and then that you have the history of the law books that's like this big. Like, it's not that hard. But it also makes sure that people aren't being prosecuted for crimes that just aren't relevant anymore. Let's see. I'm trying to make sure I get through all of these. And that was the last one. Okay. I know I didn't get a chance to touch on a lot of these. Those are just introductions on part of how I feel with politics and some of the topics that some people wanted to talk to me about. Before I go, I would like to say, if you don't like and follow Czech for Senate, please do. Tell your friends about it, because that's the only way someone like me can actually get into a place to make real change. Show them my videos, show them what I do, show them. Like, share it on your Facebook, anything social media. I am on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I passed my Rogue. I found this out. I have more followers than my dragon, which makes me happy. That was a thing. For the longest time, he had more followers than I did. I'm winning. So yeah, anything that I am on social media is some variation of Czech for Senate. CZECH for Senate. So please follow, tell your friends, and I feel like there was something else I needed to say. This is why I write stuff down, because now I'm mumbling. That's it. If you guys want to come out on the show, I'm trying to do this once a week. I'm trying to do a live feed where I can interact with all of you. So if you want to come out, please message me. I'd love to have you and talk with you about whatever topics you want. And if you have anything you'd like me to talk about or my views on anything, please feel free to send it to me. And I'll try and address it as best I can. Starting not next week. Next week we're going to be taking a break from it. But the week after I'm going to be coming back and I'll have somebody here and very specific topics to talk about. So just let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Send me a message. Just make sure you share it with your friends so when they know about who's running to be their next state senator. Thanks everybody. Have a good day. Maybe there.